a gentleman told me that the BBC was reporting that parents who had a vaccine were being told they really shouldn't be cuddling the children for a while. Now, if this is true, and I didn't get a chance before we've sort of gone live, as it were, to check it out, but viewers can check it out. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is the sort of thing, because the social distancing, the masks are all to do with disrupting our normal positive human interaction. So if you can come up with an excuse to break parents away from their children, you've already locked the children up in a house. That's the curfew, the lockdown, where the tension rises. The children, a lot of them are really missing their friends. So that deprivation of social interaction is adversely affecting the mental health of the children. And then you go another level and say, well, if you're a parent, you mustn't be cuddling and comforting your own child. So now you're really driving this very vicious wedge in. So I can't say this is real because I have not seen the report of it myself. I will follow it up. Could I believe that they are doing this? I certainly could. And the other thing is, Debbie, you mentioned, you were talking about the neural side of things, that we're hearing more and more about these expert neuroscientists and people who are studying our brain and the brain chemistry and et cetera. Well, we took great notice of the fact that back in around about 2010, when the government was meeting with French behavioural experts in order to decide how they were going to use this applied behavioural psychology in the UK and France, the main man that they brought across, who was one of Sarkozy's private experts, wasn't just a psychologist. He was a brain man. And so he wasn't sitting around that table saying, well, we can use a bit of psychology in order to nudge people to do the right things. This is a man who's trained to go way beyond that. This is heading more in the direction of your scientists that you just mentioned talking to the American military about the AI. So these are very, I was going to use the D words there. These are very, how do I describe it? Evil people, because they're not fools. On the contrary, many of them are highly intelligent, but they appear to be very callous. They appear to be almost sociopathic in the way they talk, or they are heading towards being psychopaths in their detachment from human love and kindness. And of course, we've talked about this before, back in July last year. So it's coming to the fore even more, isn't it? Who are these experts? What are their true psychology? And should we trust them? Do you trust them?
No, I don't trust them. And I know that we've spoken at length before about narcissism, pathological narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder. And since our conversation, I've gone one step further and had to have a look at something else called the dark triad, which is actually what you've just mentioned, but probably didn't even realize, in that the dark triad is narcissism, Machiavelli, I can't say that word either, Brian, you'll have to for me, thank you.
Yeah.
And psychopathy. So those three overlying conditions make up the dark triad. And if you look at the characteristics of the dark triad, you can see quite clearly that our political leaders seem to have all of the characteristics in absolute abundance, which is not just evil, but it's actually terrifying, because these are people in power. These are people that are making huge, big decisions. These are people that are driving the agenda, and yet technically they are suffering with a very serious mental health condition. And yet there's nobody that's assessing them, nobody that's reevaluating them or watching them as to what those decisions are. So I think, I don't know if there's a word that sums up more than dangerous, because I think we are in uncharted territory. and we're in extremely dangerous waters. And I think that sort of, pardon the pun, with your naval career, but I really do think, you know, we're in biblical times, I think.
I would certainly agree with that. I was going to put some good news in there, because we're very aware that there are many people really starting to sort of suffer as a result of the bad news which keeps coming along. And on a positive note, there are many, it seems that there are an increasing number of psychologists in particular, psychiatrists I'm not so sure about, but certainly psychologists who are there in that professional position, and they are starting to pick up on some of these issues. So certainly from a straw poll of the UK column, there are professional psychologists coming forward and saying, we are deeply concerned about what we're seeing as, that we'll call it, the political use of psychology. So that's got to be encouraging. But I'll hold this up in front of the camera, and then I'll probably have to show it separately or insert it into the video. But this is the Psychologist magazine from July, August 2020. It was sent to me towards the end of last year. And what's the reason? Well, it's the Psychologist, and the front page of this booklet is towards a new normal and beyond. So when you get into this, they are absolutely talking about the fact that society is going to change. And the article in this, which maybe we'll have to talk about separately, is just gleefully accepting that life is changing, it's not going to be the same, and we need to get on board, ride over the rainbow into the new world. So while we've got some psychologists who see the danger, we've got others that clearly don't. They're part of it.
Oh, I think we're looking at the game theory, aren't we? We're looking at, Dominic Cummings wrote it in his blog, Reward and Punishment, where they're using psychological techniques on all of us. We've mentioned the Biderman's coercion chart, there's non-touch torture. And a lot of psychologists also are failing, I think, in their duty of care to all of us, anybody that's going along with this, because clearly the mental health problems caused by this behavior by people that are suffering from serious conditions, in my opinion, the consequences are, they're immense. And people say to me, do you have a crystal ball? You know, how do you know what's going to happen next? How do you know what the pattern of events is going to be? And the plans are all out there. And once you start learning about the personalities that are actually driving the agenda, and then you look for the agenda, because they've written it all down, they're not that clever. Even though, you know, you're looking at some serious psychiatric conditions and mental health problems, they're not actually that clever. So if you look at a document that's called SPA's Pandemic 2025 to 2028, they literally, the whole plan of what we're going through now is there month by month. And it fails to amaze me, really, how if people were just to read this document, and it's a futuristic scenario that was compiled by the Johns Hopkins University, and Johns Hopkins is a big red flag for me, because they seem to be coming up in all sorts of things like Imperial College and Oxford and all the same old names. But they did this futuristic scenario for a coronavirus to be unleashed on the world in 2025. But they were very kind in the fact that they wrote a monthly plan, so January, February, March. And if you just look at that plan, you can clearly see that everything that's happening now is in that plan, together with all the psychological interventions and the media messaging, the 3-word phrases, the game theory, all of that is clearly in the document. And yet many people seem to be missing out on it. And so if you combine that with the SAGE minutes, the government SAGE minutes, the plan for the next 2 years, I'm afraid, doesn't look very good. And according to what I'm seeing, I think we could have a new COVID starting probably March, I would anticipate, called COVID-21. And then we'll have a little break before COVID-23 comes along. So that's what I'm seeing from the SPARS pandemic paper, and also the more involvement with children and pregnant women as well. So maybe ramping up the fear factor. We've now used granny and granddad and told children not to go and hug their grandparents because they might kill them, which actually, going back to your point, when we were looking at children and families, to me, this is child abuse. And if I stuck my child, or if I locked my child in my house 24/7 or 23/7, didn't allow them to go to school, and when they went to school, they had to stand in a circle and they weren't allowed to go and hug their grandparents or their friends, a year and a half ago, I would have had child protection down on me like a ton of bricks, telling me that I was abusing my children. And yet this is what the government are doing to every child on the planet right now. And to me, it's completely evil.
Completely evil. Debbie, we're coming up to an hour, so I think we'll end there. But this SPARS pandemic document I've called up on screen. Shall I just read? If I read a little bit from their introduction, and we could say that we can do another chat and follow up on this particular thing, and you will get the opportunity to highlight the similarities between what they predicted in their futuristic exercise and what we've actually seen. These amazing coincidences keep popping up, don't they? But let's just read this. Sorry, read this introduction. It says, effective communication about medical countermeasures, including drugs, devices, and biologics, is often critical in emergency situations. Such communication, however, does not just happen. It must be planned and prepared for. One mechanism to develop communication strategies is through the use of prospective scenarios, which allow readers the opportunity to rehearse responses whilst also weighing the implications of their actions. This article describes the development of such a scenario, the SPARS Pandemic 2025-28. Steps in this process included deciding on a time frame, identifying likely critical uncertainties, and then using this framework to construct a storyline covering both the response and recovery phases of a fictional emergency event. Lessons learned from the scenario development and how the scenario can be used to improve communication are also discussed. So isn't it fascinating that you have a virus pandemic scenario, but what's the focus on? The focus is on not how you're going to get in on the ground and stop it. The focus is on how you're going to communicate with the public. I think that's
story.
Pardon?
A story. A story. I mean, they said it there that it's just a story.
Yeah. So Debbie, last question. How did you discover that document?
Just putting my head down, joining dots, and up it popped. I can't remember what I put in as an algorithm into the search bar, but it came up. And I think I'd been looking at Event 201, I'd been looking at Lockstep, I'd been looking at all the other exercises that have been done, especially in this country as well, Cygnus, etc. And I was especially interested in Johns Hopkins University because they seem to be as involved in all of this as Oxford in the UK and Imperial here in the UK. And up it popped. And as I read it, I literally couldn't believe what I was reading, because they've even named the pandemic a coronavirus. You know, they've even used a coronavirus, and they've done it month by month. So you can clearly see where we're heading, and that this isn't going to finish, or isn't planned to finish anytime soon. And interestingly, the International Monetary Fund, if you go and look on their website, they've actually got COVID exercises planned until 2024. So, you know, this is planned for years ahead. This isn't going to end this summer or next winter or the following spring. We're in this for the long haul.
And we'll just end on the fact that Boris Johnson said, you know, a little while ago, a day ago, that when he was asked, you know, when when we're going to come out of lockdown, he got very vague indeed, but all he could stress was how dangerous this particular inverted commas variant of COVID was, highly contagious, and I can't really say. So yeah, I think the inference is that this game is going to be dragged out for as long as they can do it. What can we say to people that's a booster? For me, I would like to say to people, you've got to stand your ground. You've got to make the challenge wherever you get the opportunity. You don't want to be putting yourself at risk. You don't want to be starting an aggressive altercation with the police. But everywhere you can make sensible comments, you can talk to people, you can tell them why they're wrong, you can point them at the information. This is where we've got to go, but you cannot do nothing, because that's too much. Anything you'd like to add to that, Debbie? What can we get people doing?
Yeah, be brave. Be brave, stand firm, and question everything. And I think, you know, the questions that I ask people that kind of floor them is, why would we need a vaccine for something that 99.7% of people recover from? Because let's celebrate that news. That's, you know, that's fantastic that 99.7% of people get better. And the next question is, where did flu fly off to? And the next question is, why do you test healthy people and you're ignoring the sick? And I think once you turn the questions back on other people and maybe seed them a little bit, but to be brave and to stand your ground and fear nothing, I think, and question everything, question the narrative.